Okay, this is episode 1 of this new series called Esports Mount Rushmore. And the basic concept, I'll give a very quick overview, is Mount Rushmore is a place that exists in America. I know for people who've watched movies, they might think that's sci-fi. It's actually a real thing. They carved like 4 of the presidents' faces into this mountain. And the concept is, even though that obviously doesn't work in theory, like those aren't just the 4 best presidents there ever were. The concept is these are iconic figures who, for whatever reason, deserve their place on Mount Rushmore. And so I wanted a feature like that in esports. But the key detail is, I don't want it to just be, like, say someone's from Counter-Strike, who were the 4 best players in their opinion, you know? That is not as interesting. What I want it to be is, who would their 4 iconic figures be? And so they get to choose what the term iconic means. That might mean to them most innovative, or maybe it does mean the best. Maybe being the best is what makes them stand out to them. So for each person in general, I'm going to go with their specialty game, and I want them to give me their reasons. So for the first episode, I've started out with my mate here, Chiu, who's a writer for actually now many games, but we found him in StarCraft2. He was toiling away in StarCraft2, and that is your home game. That's the game you come from, right? That's the one you watch like all the big matches and stuff in.
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay, so we're going to start with you here, and obviously, in the same setting as Mount Rushmore, we have 4 names, faces, figures to put on this Mount Rushmore. So for StarCraft 2, who is the first name that we're going to start with?
I'll go with the obvious one, MVP. No matter what criteria you use, he's always going to be on there. No matter how you change it, how you think about it, how you look at the game, he's always going to be one of the 4.
Does the fact that you start with him and you give him that sort of introduction, does that mean he is also the best player of all time in Stuchiu's opinion? I believe you ranked him number 1, right, in your list.
Yeah, I ranked him number 1. I still consider him the greatest there ever was. He had the Korean domination. He had the foreign domination. He changed the game multiple times in every single matchup, and he had that special quality about him that no other StarCraft 2 players ever had, where it doesn't matter how far down he is or how terrible the situations are outside of the game or inside the game. He can have a broken back. If he's playing Brood War Infestor, he can play his worst matchup in PvT. He'd always find a way to win.
Okay, so I remember when a lot of people have kind of like made that observation, that kind of, it's the idea that like, even though he was also the greatest champion, okay, there's a lot of champions, for example, who are just front runners, okay? Like they win when the meta suits them, and they win when they're ahead, and they win because of their skills or a matchup advantage. The key detail you're kind of like isolating here is that MVP did all that, by the way. Like if you go and look at like January 2011 first one, yeah, he's doing all that stuff. Like he's just the best player, and he's got the sickest micro, and he's wrecking everyone, and the matchup's super sick, and blah, blah, blah. But he also was like the guy who could do the comeback and could somehow win when maybe he shouldn't win, or matchup-wise, or health-wise, or form-wise, right?
Yeah, that's unique to only him. I've been watching this game for 6 years, looking for if there was another one. I mean, some people can make comebacks. Some people can, like, every once in a while, might be able to go to win in a bad matchup or a bad meta. But only MVP's done it for so long in like the worst metas and like the worst conditions. So there's something specific about him. Like I've seen it in a few other players outside of StarCraft 2, but inside StarCraft 2, there's no one quite like him.
Why do you think he stands alone in that sense? Like, is it something about the game itself or the nature of competition? What do you think is... Because, I mean, there's been so many players and so many great players as well. You'd think you'd have, like, 1 or 2 other ones that are like that, you know?
You would think that, right? But there's something different about his mental processes compared to everybody else. Like, okay, so when you think about practice, when you think about playing the game, when you think about analyzing the game, modeling the game, becoming great at the game... All right, so the complete opposite of MVP, who was also a great player, was Innovation, who I consider the greatest standard player or the greatest patch Terran to ever live. Because the thing about Innovation was all of his peaks, all of his like great achievements are all directly correlated to the meta of the game.
Yep.
Where Terran was the best race or had a winning strategy against the other races. So the thing about Innovation was he could take the standard, or sometimes he'd set the standard himself, but then he refine it over and over and over again. And the way you refine it is you look at a situation, you play out each branch, and you're like, okay, how do I avoid this branch, this problem? How do I get to this point? So like in the MMMM era for Innovation, Like he avoided all the counterattack shenanigans by attacking first and constantly putting on pressure, and he did it way better than everybody else during that time. So it came to the point where there's only like one guy who could beat him straight up in that style of play without like out strategizing him or doing early damage to him. Whereas in MVP's case, he'd do like the opposite, where because like in innovation, he's like reducing it to like one single line of thought. It's like I'm building this. I'm doing this build. I make this composition, and then I follow the pre-made plan I've built over like tens of thousands of games, right? Sure. Whereas in MVP's case, he'd be going into a single game because he couldn't really practice that much. Specifically talking about his 2012 era, because that's when all the crazy comeback shit started happening, and he'd go into the single game and he couldn't practice as much because of his injuries, and then it was getting harder because during that PvT era where he was like playing all these players like Naniwa, Squirtle, Parting, Seed, all these guys were creating new and innovative builds. So he'd go against them, and he'd have to find his own way. Like he'd have to analyze the game mid game without breaking like a pause. Which is like he'd think about it, he'd assess the situations, he'd be like, okay, I have this many bases compared to this many bases. I have this army to this army. I have these map positions compared to this map positions. What can I do in this situation to get me the win?
Sure.
That's how he thinks about it, I think.
Okay, so I mean, you're kind of like linking mentality to how he assesses the metagame. Another thing that's quite interesting about him as a player, this is something, funnily enough, when I was friends with Naniwa, I always used to constantly tell Naniwa, okay, because Naniwa is a great example of someone who was a great player, and most players he played who are Westerners, he's probably more skilled than them. In fact, he's probably a better player. But his biggest problem is, if anything ever went wrong in the game, or it went wrong in game one and now he's in game two, his mentality would always be like, if I'm not at 100%, if that means I'm not at 100%, I'm fucked. Like, if I'm not 100%, I may as well be at 0%. Like, I'm going to lose the game. Like, I have to be, everything has to be perfect. Whereas I always used to say to him, the difference between you and MVP, okay, sure, MVP was a better player in his prime set, but I said, ignore that. The key difference isn't that he's a better player than you. It's that for you, if you're at your 9 out of 10 level, you'd probably win the game. But if MVP's at his 6 out of 10 level, he'll still try and find a way to win the game. He'll still figure out, right, I'm at my low level now, but is there still a way to win the game, and just do that. He won't think about, well, why am I at my 9 level and this is bullshit and that guy's not even better. None of those thoughts, at least as an outsider, I can't know this, It feels like none of those thoughts ever go through his mind. Somehow he really is like a mixture of like, he must be confident and know he's good, but somehow also, and this is very rare in champions, able to sort of realize, like, actually, but I'm not the best in this match maybe right now, so I've got to figure out another way to win.
Yeah, it's like, okay, there was this quote from I Love Oof back during his, after he, like, at one point he was the greatest of his era. Yep. But Savior was taking over, and then he started getting this really frustrated slump, and then he was doing terrible, and then eventually got out of the slump, and then somebody asked him, an interviewer asked him, how did you get out of the slump? Because you were the greatest, and then you went terrible, and then you came back. And he said, the difference between me now and the me before then was that the me before then couldn't accept the fact that I was no longer the greatest. And because he couldn't accept that fact, he couldn't see his weaknesses. And because he couldn't see his weaknesses, he couldn't find a way to win. And then in MVP's case, there was never, he's confident. He probably always thought he could find a way to win. But in his case, he's like, okay, so he'd see his weaknesses head on. That was his, that might have been one of his greatest strengths. Like, he could self-evaluate. He's like, okay, I'm terrible at this. I'm terrible at this. I'm terrible at this. But I can win in the fourth way, which would be like, like in Squirtle, like, okay, I can surprise him by doing like 3 builds that he's never seen me do before, and that's how I'm gonna win.
I mean, there's also that weird aspect where, so this might sound strange, but as soon as someone gets really good at something in a game like StarCraft particularly, they just seem to think to themselves like, right, I'm going to ride with this and I'm going to die with this. Like, if this works, then I win. If it doesn't work, then I lose. And so it's almost like another example, I'll go with Naniwa again because I know his mentality very well. So again, Naniwa would have all these matchups where if it got to a macro game, he would win. Like, he knew he had the best chance. But as a result, he would just play a macro game 4 games in a row. And I would be like, well, even if you have the best chance to do that, why not do an all-in, like a pre-planned one, like, I'm going to do it at this point specifically so that when I play a similar map, he'll have to at least think about, am I going for an all-in or am I going for a greedy building, right? Essentially setting up the rest of the series. I mean, isn't this like an area, I'm not an expert at StarCraft 2, didn't MVP have some sort of like a series planning as well? That was some sort of element of his mystique?
Yeah, he was the, I'll go ahead and say it, he's the greatest series planner StarCraft 2's ever seen. He's likely the greatest series planner StarCraft 2 will ever see. Okay, when you talk about Naniwa, it's like, yeah, he'll do 4 macro games in a row, but if you do 4 macro games in a row, what's going to happen is the guy's going to know about it, and the only way you're going to win those 4 macro games in a row is if you're playing at your 9 out of 10 level, 10 out of 10 level, right? Assuming it's even chances. Sure, yeah. So in MVP's case, let's say he's at a 6 out of 10 level. He has to win 1 macro game. How is he going to win the 1 macro game against somebody like Squirtle, during their primes? What MVP would probably do is he'd probably boost that 1 macro game by playing all these mind games that made it hard to predict when he was going to do the macro game, which is what he did in, I think it was like the 2nd or 3rd game of their GSL finals.
Okay. So
the thing about that is like it's kind of, I think of it as basic game theory, where basically in Naniwa's case, yeah, he'd do the macro game, and then at his best it'd be like 100% strength, whereas in MVP's case, he'd take like in a standalone game, and if it was a macro game, it'd just be like 60 or 70%. But because he set it up previously between a bunch of other different games,
yeah,
it would be way stronger. It'd be way stronger once the macro game hit, which is actually what he did to Rain in just like GSL Season 4. He did 2 all-ins in a row, and then what happened was Rain was already a defensive player, but he played even more defensive in the following 3 games, and in the following 3 games, MVP played super greedy. Any all-in could have killed him, but he already understood Rain's like mentality at that time was, if I get to the end game, I win for sure. And this guy is super cheesy, and he's worse than me. I'm gonna cut all my losses. I'm gonna go for late game. And if he's gonna cut all his losses, he's gonna go for late game. I'm gonna cut every single corner, and then I'm gonna beat him before he gets to his late game, which was the creation of the SCV pool, which like dominated the rest of HOTS, or the first few years of HOTS.
Sure.
That matchup.
Okay, so it's clear that part of the appeal to you, and I mean, this is one of the great aspects of this guy's story, is the era when he won, when essentially he wasn't the best, and he had his injury, and Terran wasn't actually overpowered at that point in time. So I understand why that's an appeal, okay? Because usually, I've noticed this like trend in StarCraft actually, that when someone's a dominant champion, people actually hate them, and they're like, oh, I want him to lose. Yeah. But as soon as they drop off, everyone's like, fuck, why is he losing? Oh, I'll cheer for him now. Come on, SD. But let's talk now, though, about the era when he was just straight out the best.
Okay, that's actually a pretty...
What was he so good at in that period?
Okay, it's actually strange, because usually in the evolution of a game, the first 1 or 2 years is mostly about innovation. Like, who's coming out with a new build, who's coming out with new tactics, and they dominate for a while. Like, MKP did that with his Marine splits for a little bit. And MC did that with because he understood the tactical aspects of like force field. So did Huck. Whereas in MVP's case, you can't necessarily say he innovated that much in the early game. Besides taking like Brood War builds and then like understanding how they would work in StarCraft 2 and then using that. But what made him especially good was like he understood the game at such a fundamental level that he could take other people's specialties, apply them to his own build, apply them to his own strengths, and then make them superior to what they were doing. So like he'd take General's 3 macro Terran style, and then he'd take Marine King's like Marine split style, and then he'd add it to his own, and he'd make it better than they were doing. Or like he'd take Marine King's TVT base trade style, but he'd take it a step further than him. He's like he realizes the weaknesses of the style, and that's why Marine King could never beat him, and then eventually Marine King could never beat him because he's like mentally weak.
Okay.
So
aside from like straight up injury, which clearly was something that played a factor in his life, and you know, players also sometimes burn out if they've practiced a lot. Is there any convenient or simple narrative as to why MVP stopped being so good and stopped being a player that could win titles anymore? Have you come to any conclusions?
All right. I mean, the injury is the obvious one, but I think it's because he's the play. Like, all right, there are two types of players, right? There are players who have to grind in order to understand the game itself. Like they have to play it over and over and over again. They don't like they can't look outside of the game and think about it and then apply it to their own game. Like a person I'm thinking about right now would be like TaeJa. He'd be able to do that. Like he want to play for months, but he'd look at somebody's game to take it and then run with it. Whereas in MVP's case, he had a bit of both. Like he could think a lot, but he needed the practice in order to do what he was doing. And then what eventually ended up happening was he only had one style left, which was like which is kind of like this one punch style, I guess you call it, where because at some point he must have accepted the fact that he'd always be behind no matter what he did, like no matter what he did, because he's like his injuries were too much, his mechanics were too bad compared to everybody else. So he'd always like force the game into this area where he'd either win or die off of one push, which is like what he kind of did against Jaedong at the BlizzCon in 2013. What he did against I think he might have done it against MMA. I'm pretty sure he did it against Grubby, and like when he was playing WCS EU, like the most famous one where that was his problem, was like he kept doing this style, but the style was like slowly fading out of fashion, and he was getting weaker at the same time. Like the last time you see that style work for him was against Innovation in the WCS Season 1 finals, in like Game 4 where he was like super behind, 30 SCVs behind, and then he had to find a way all the way back, like pulling a rabbit out of his hat for one last time. So it's like that style was like really cool to watch, but there was no way it was gonna keep going, and he just didn't have the practice in order to like increase his skill or his knowledge anymore.
Okay, so who was the second name? We've got MVP up there, chiseled that in. Who's the second name on stuchiu's StarCraft2 Esports Mount Rushmore?
Okay, the second name is Rain.
Presumably the Protoss player, not the Terran player for Fnatic.
Oh god, no, not the Terran player.
Okay, we're talking about the former Brood War player called Sun or something, and he was Rain in StarCraft 2. Okay, so why does he... I mean, for example, I'll just set the context up. For anyone who doesn't follow StarCraft 2, that's already a massive deviation. Like, it's true, Rain is an all-time great player, but if you ask people to rank like the people who won the most tournaments or the people who are like considered the best of all time, he probably wouldn't be the second name out of everyone's mouth. So why is Rain second on this list here? Why have you gone with him?
Okay, so I wanted at least one player from each race. And so I thought about it. Who are the greatest Protoss players?
Okay, so Xel'Naga is going to be the fourth player. I can't wait to see who that is. Okay, so keep going, Stuchiu.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so he's the greatest Protoss for you?
No, he's not the greatest Protoss, but he represented exactly what I wanted.
Right.
So among the greatest Protosses, there was like MC, Rain, Zest, like those guys come to mind. But the reason I chose Rain is because he represented a specific era. Like, okay, MVP represents like 2011 to 2012 era for me, right?
Yep.
Like he not only did he represent that, he represented like the foundation of all Terran play. Like you can even in like 2 different expansions later, you still like see parts of what he did like permeate through the metagame. Whereas Rain was like he fundamentally changed the way Protoss looked at the race. Like I'm not sure why, but for some reason, among like below the top level players, the majority of the players don't think of their race like as an isolated thing. They think of their race in terms of what the top player is doing. So, for instance, in like Protoss from 2011 to 2012, a lot of them were thinking in the way of like, what's MC doing? What's Huck doing? And then they would follow them, and then they just keep doing these stupid all-ins over and over and over again. Or not, they weren't that stupid, but they became stupid.
So I've got a good example of this, actually. Believe it or not, okay, this is a great example of where someone doesn't have to be himself good enough to come up with a really good point. So the player QXC, the American Terran player, is obviously not an all-time great player. In fact, he'd get smashed by, like, most people who you can think of as a good player, right? But the key thing is, he was actually someone who was pretty good at thinking, like, coming up with thoughts about the game. And I remember doing an interview with him in, I think it was early 2012, and I actually asked him, because at this point in time, I mean, it's ironic that it's early 2012, because, it was in 2011, actually, maybe. Let me think which one of the two is it? Might have been, okay, I think it was probably early 2011. The reason I say that it was 2012. Scratch that. The reason why I say it's ironic it's early 2012 is because this is before Zerg had completely just destroyed the Western scene, right?
Yeah.
So when I say this comment, people are going to think, like, what the fuck are you talking about? But believe it or not, at the time, the best Western Zergs in general were still Idra, Ret. Yeah, sure, Stefano had just come onto the scene, but, he hadn't taken over yet to where everyone just played that mid-game style that he invented, right? But at the time, and I made this comment to QXC, and I asked him a question, which, by the way, is a brilliant meta contextual question, but it doesn't work as much if you listen to his answer, okay? So my question was, does he think that there's any players who basically made a mistake in which race they chose? Like, if you look at their skills and what they're good at, maybe they should have chosen another race. So a famous example of this is in StarCraft 2, everyone says that Bisu should have just played Terran instead, because basically with Medivacs, etc., he would have just been able to harass like a motherfucker like he liked to in Brood War, whereas instead, in the way people at the time were playing Protoss, wasn't really like his standard style, even though, to be fair, Hero did do a lot of harassment himself. But as a general question, it's a good question, right? I have to admit, I was very new to StarCraft 2 at the time, but the answer that QXC gave doesn't destroy the question, but it's quite an interesting one. He just says, but the problem is, people just think of the race in terms of whoever the best player is. So, for example, he said, everyone thinks you can't do any early game aggression and that you have to out-macro your opponent as Zerg because Idra and Ret are the best foreign Zergs, and that is all they do. Like, we know famously, Ret was the worst example ever. He would literally just sit there, and either he droned up and won the game, or you just killed him. Like, this is a guy where he made his classic mistakes there. So what's funny is, kind of what he's saying here is the principle you're talking about, right? Basically, everyone just looked at MC and Huck. And by the way, these were guys where these are all like early to mid-game Protosses who just find the timing of when to kill you with like Blink Stalker or whatever, or Forgate. And so since their whole game, by the way, that is their strength. They're fantastic at that. Yeah. Since their whole strength's like that, essentially, I mean, you didn't add this part, but presumably there was no great player who had all the skills as a Protoss, except, I mean, ironically, Nanawa became one of these as a Westerner, but who thought to himself, you know what? Actually, a Protoss can play macro all game if he wants.
Yeah.
Which is what Rain does, right?
Yeah, that's what Rain does. That's fundamentally why I chose him over MCs, because he basically like changed the paradigm of that entire race, of how they thought about the race. Like, most famously, he did it for PvP, because everybody before that thought PvP was some kind of rock, paper, scissors shit, where it'd be like Robo beats Gateway beats Stargate. It
was just blind counter, right? And people thought you couldn't win with consistency. Everybody thought it was blind counter.
Whereas Rain was like, no, this is how you do the build. These are the units. This is the positioning. These are the tactics. And he'd always get to 2 base, then 3 base, and then win every single time. Exact same composition, exact same like position. And every Protoss who played back then will say the same thing I'm saying now. They'll say Rain changed their lives, because Rain changed the way Protoss played. Like, the only other player, okay, well, not the only, but the only other player who like fundamentally changed it that far might have been like Parting, when he did this PvT Storm stuff. Yeah. But the thing about Parting compared to Rain was like, Parting was doing a tactical innovation that got you to the macro game, but that was eventually got cut down after HOTS came in. Whereas like the change in like mentality Rain gave to Protoss players around the world is the basis of like of the domination of all the Kespa Protosses that came after him. And he even then he was still among them, like Zest, Hero, CJ Hero, Rain himself, Deer, Classic, Stats. All those guys were like in some way influenced by Rain, so that's why I chose Rain over them.
Okay, so I will openly say, I don't care about any other player in history. Like, there's other players who won more tournaments. Rain has always been my favorite Protoss player in StarCraft 2, purely for the reason, kind of like what you're saying here, because when he first came along in 2012, I remember thinking the same thing, right? I thought to myself, like, oh, there is someone who can just play macro all the time. Like, here's the problem, right? Even if people don't admit this to this day, but because in general, the meta game does suggest that worse players should try all-ins more often and should try like hard counter timing attacks. They should, because they've got less chance of winning in macro games where there's more decisions and more opportunities and more decisions to be made, etc. Because in general, they should try to increase variance. It is in general the case that, the greatest macro players, they're the best players, and a lot of the cheesy players were the kind of like middling players who just try to do results. So as a result, a lot of people to this day do still think of like cheesy players, like, oh, you didn't win properly or whatever. And I have to say, from talking to Nanoa, like, that's someone else who had to really overcome that, like I've mentioned here. He really did just think you lost in that sense. So as a result, a lot of us, and by the way, some of this also comes from Artosis. I'll just put it on him because he's someone who worships anyone who macros, right, and thinks that's like the right way to play. And so I kind of buy into it because it is sexier if you can just like out macro someone and win with like the long game. And so to me, when Rain came along, I was like, right, this is the chosen one. This is the one who can do it, This is the Protoss who can play that style. And you know what? He's going to teach all those fucking Zergs with the Broodlord Infestor, and he's going to take all those bullshit Terrans who won all those titles, and he's going to show them that actually a Protoss can play macro and he can win every game as well. And it looked like it was going to happen, Stuchiu. He won that fucking OSL, and then he was in the semis against this busted up MVP. I was like, it's going to happen, mate. It's happening. He's coming. And somehow he got killed. And then the weird thing about Rain is he never has a period where like a whole year he's a god. He has these like distinct periods where he just dies and then he's reborn again. He's like, the savior is back, the savior's back. And then he has a little period where he's sick again and then he keeps dying. What do you think of like this, like the context of his career in terms of when he was very good and when he wasn't and what he represented?
Okay, well, for the 2012 one, I have to give Rain credit. Man, nobody fucking nope. There was something wrong with MVP, man. It's like if there were analysts back then, any of them would have told you MVP's going to lose this season, he's going to lose this season, he's going to lose this game, he's going to lose this series every single time. Because the shit he was doing in order to win those series was not shit you could think about. It was not shit you could legitimately that's a quantifiable skill. It's a quantifiable strategy. It's a quantifiable tactic. He was playing mind games. Like he understood Rain better than Rain understood Rain. So. Okay, so that was the first part. The second part of the career...
Wait a minute. When you say that, you understood Rain better than Rain. That makes it sound like in the game, right, he did something. And Rain's like, well, you could only have won if I'd have gone left. He's like, yeah, but you did go left. He goes, but how did you know that? As a child, your mother told me you often would. Like, come on, mate, what do you mean you understood Rain better than Rain? You got to give me something more. That's a sexy quote, but you got to give me like an example or something that comes to mind in terms of how he matched up in that sense.
Okay, so Rain, by the time he played MVP had the... I'm not sure if he actually did watch, but he had the ability to see all of Rain's games up to that point. Have you understood Rain? Like the point about Rain is he actually played PvP, PvZ, PvT all in similar ways, which is like he's like, okay, fuck you, I'm gonna go to the macro game. I'm gonna play it safe. He was like Creator but better. Creator had a shitload of other problems that popped up later in his career, but basically Rain had none of those problems. So the thing about Rain was he fundamentally believes that if he gets to the end game, he will beat anybody. Right? That was his fundamental belief.
Sure.
And then MVP's fundamental belief was, Rain thinks he can beat me in the late game. Very true. So I'm going to tip him into thinking he should really, really, really like sacrifice everything to get to the late game. And then that's what happened. Like he all-ins, like I think it was like first game and the second game. I'm not exactly sure the order. He all-ins in the first game and the second game. Because he's fundamentally he's trying to drive into that lesson. Like MVP's I'm MVP. I'm broke. I'm terrible at this matchup. The only way you're gonna beat me is if you stop all of my all-ins. So he just kept hammering in that lesson into Rain's head. And Rain by game 3 is like, you know what? This guy is one cheesy bastard. I'm just gonna play everything safe. Not gonna cut any corner. In fact, I'm actually gonna add I'm going to actually go out of my way to buy safety. I'm going to sacrifice my economic. I'm going to sacrifice some of my tech. I'm going to sacrifice some of my armor composition for the safety. And then that was like MVP's trick, because like he forced him to think like that. And then MVP this is like the second time MVP does this, but it's the first time anybody's ever really like thought of it as an actual strategy, whereas before it was like some random gimmick that was used by bit. Whereas like he would do the 3 base macro. But MVP would cut every corner, and then he'd pull the SCVs and do the all-in attack like main bomber and flash saves,
the ultimate mind fuck, right?
And yeah, it's the ultimate mind fuck. And then so what happens is Rain sacrifices early game, he sacrifices mid game. It's like I'm gonna get to the late game, and right before late game happens in that 5-minute period, all of a sudden the entire army and all the SCVs are coming at him. It's like shit, I have nothing, and he goes in the 4th game thinking, shit, you know what? That's bullshit. I don't believe he's gonna do that again. And then MVP just kept doing it again and again, and that's why MVP won when Rain should have been he should have been at least a 70-30 in that matchup.
Okay.
Well, to be fair, I think everybody should have been 70-30 against MVP during that time. He's he just bullshitted his way. So
we can give him a bit of a pass on that era.
Yeah,
right? Basically, almost no one could have beaten MVP maybe in that scenario then.
Yeah, it's like the only guy who's going to beat MVP is going to be like, somebody who has Brood War Infester. So it doesn't matter how much fucking army you have. He'll just fungal you, which is like what Life did, right?
Yep.
Or like
still barely won, but okay, yeah.
Yeah, still barely won. Still barely won.
Okay, so what about the other eras of Reign then? Because like I say, he had like a couple of kind of like revivals.
Yeah. Okay. So 2013, I actually thought he was the best Protoss for a long period of time. Okay, yeah, 2013 was the one when he beat Maru in the... No, it was the one he lost to Maru, actually, in the OSL Finals.
Yeah.
That was always a strange one to me. I think it's because I think Reign was actually the best PvT at the time, but what happened was, like, Maru, like, got into his head for some reason. It's like, Maru got into his head, but the thing about Maru was... He's actually a bit underrated in like the end game, and I think that might have been what Reign was thinking, because like he overcommitted to an attack, and then Maru just like killed him. So basically, here's what happens: like Maru won that out of 2 games, even though it was like a best of 7. The first game was like 11-11, where like he cheats the shit out of Reign, and Reign's like, Jesus Christ, okay, whatever, I'll just skip it. I'll just put that out of my mind, and they go for the late game. But what happens in the late game is they both get to the end part. And then Maru actually outplays Reign positionally, and like the max versus max army. So at that point, Reign's you have to understand Reign's like fundamental belief is he could beat anybody in the end game.
Yeah.
So he ran into Maru, and he's like, and they like kind of got shook, I guess. Might have been because what happens is like Maru's beating him in the early game with the cheeses, and now he's showing he can beat him in the late game. Like where does he go from here? Because he's not SOS. He's not gonna pull out some crazy wacky build to win out. He's not partying. He's gonna like out micro his way out of hell. Sure. So he's like I think he was just a level below. He might have just been a level below Maru at that particular point. Because think about like rises of great players is you don't see their greatness happening. Like it surprises you like how good a great player is at the peak at the rise of the peak, right? Because nobody's ever really seen it. Like you go into that season before, like nobody's picking Maru to win that season.
Sure.
Like nobody even like when we go back in time, like there were like 3 young players everybody thought was going to be great. It was going to be Life, it was going to be Creator, it was going to be TaeJa. Nobody thought that Maru was going to be that great.
Yeah.
So I think he just ran into Maru's fated run maybe, but and then the other problem was and then after that, he goes to the WCS season finals, right? And he plays against TaeJa. Now, the funny thing about TaeJa is he's actually like where Reign thinks he's fundamentally he'll always win the late game. TaeJa was actually the guy who would always win the late game. So it was just like a mismatch between the two of them because they're both playing like the same style, but TaeJa was more patient than Reign was. And the thing about Reign is he played in Korea. TaeJa played in like 400 tournaments in WCS. Like the two of them never ran into each other. Sure. So if you never run into TaeJa, and you never like even if he plays ladder, I heard it's like he barely played ladder back then, or barely played any games. The thing is like you don't really understand like the skill of TaeJa until you actually play him into an end game. Like even if like Reign watched like a 400 tournaments and watching TaeJa play. Like, which is doubtful because most Koreans never did that. But even if he did that, he wouldn't understand because TaeJa was just bopping these guys out of the game before it ever got there. But in TaeJa's case, what would happen is he'd just take somebody to the end game, and then he'd just drag it out forever because TaeJa had a better understanding of all decision making compared to like almost all of his peers in the end game, and that included Reign. So that was the problem. Was like Reign was thinking to himself probably like he was thinking. Like in the World 1 game, which is like the critical game of that series. He was thinking to himself, okay, so TaeJa got me. He got my third base, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to macro out of this. I'm going to build an armor composition you can't beat, and then I'll beat him with a one-man fight, right? TaeJa's like, here's what's going to happen. I'm never going to fight. I'm just gonna slowly drain him out. I'm slowly going to pick off his observers. I'm going to take off his map position. I'm going to take out like every single piece that's free. It's like, oh, this unit's out of position, this probe's out of position. I'll just slowly siege him off. And then every time Rain moved out, he made a counter move on the position of the map so that Rain could never commit to the full fight that was advantageous for himself. Eventually, he just got like dragged out of the game. It was like, and then he lost like 40 observers that game because TaeJa scanned all of them. Yeah. And like every fight he took was terrible because every fight he took like what happened is Rain either took the fight or he'd have to go home. And then if he went home, it was even worse than he took the fight. So he eventually just took the fight and then he lost. And then like when you lose like that, it's like it's bad because that was like Rain's one true belief that he was better than everybody else in that end game. And then like Rain and then TaeJa like slapped him there. It's like, where does Rain go from there? He doesn't know.
That like cracked his paradigm.
Yeah.
Okay,
like
so keep going. Do you have a bit more?
Yeah, he's actually similar to Snoot in that way. It's like if you crack them in the end game, like they break.
Okay. So here's the problem though, is when Rain, like I told you that, I kind of made it like personal. I described why I thought he was super good and he like played into all my fantasies that like, that there would be a Protoss that would come and could just macro all these fucks who like were playing the broken races. And the problem was he was doing it, but in doing so, he also taught me that like, yes, you could do that. And all the people who were cheesy didn't have to be cheesy all the time, but Protoss is a race that does like essentially reward you for some cheese. And so either you have to do the nano scenario I told you, use the cheese to set up the macro, which is a great thing to do, or you have to just sometimes use the cheese because it's also another tool. And if you only do the macro style, as you'll see in the case of someone like Rain, it's going to be very hard to win a lot of tournaments like that. Like every now and then you've got to kind of like use the power of the Protoss, right? And isn't this something where for the majority of his career, he didn't really learn this lesson, right? He was a very stubborn player, right?
Yeah, incredibly stubborn. Because the thing is, if you look back at his career, like, okay, so actually this goes back to MVP. MVP plays MMA during the GSL finals at BlizzCon, right?
Sure.
And then MMA crushes him. And then MVP looks back at that finals. He realizes MMA outprepared him. MMA had better builds. He knew how MVP was going to play, and they just countered him, and he won. That was kind of how that finals was set up in MVP's mind. And he quickly learned that lesson, and he took what MMA did, and then he made himself better because of it.
Okay, so now, that's like that. It's like that classic pattern where sometimes actually a player becomes greater because of a key loss that kind of like teaches them like this is what you have to change.
Yeah, Rain could have had that same series lesson after he lost the MVP in 2012, but he didn't get that lesson. And then he could have got the same lesson from Maru in 2013, didn't get that lesson. And then eventually, like the point where he finally gets his lesson is actually when he leaves Kespa. He's like, okay, I'm done. I'm done with this hard like slave Kespa life. Yeah. I'm gonna live free. I'm gonna go travel the world, and I'm gonna pop these foreigners for some free money, just like what TaeJa would do. And then at that point, when he was free from that practice, at some point he learned the lesson that MVP was probably MVP was incidentally trying to impart to him was you don't need, or your macro game can be great, but it can be even greater if you cheese, which is what he started doing during his final runs in 2015 when he finally got the GSL.
Yeah.
And like if you look back at the runs, like he actually was the best macro player for PvZ, but he was including a lot more cheese in that season than he'd ever done before. Like I think in that year he like if you combine that year and combine all of his games and the amount of cheese he did was more than all the rest of his career combined. So it was it's strange because I think skill wise he was way better in 2012, 2013, and 2014, but he only wins the GSL in 2015 because he learns that lesson.
Okay,
it's very strange, and kind of sad.
It's kind of what happens to people's careers in sports, though. Like, it's a funny thing, okay? We have a concept. It's mainly basketball that I know in this sense. Like, I don't know necessarily the ages for the other sports. But in basketball, famously, the reason why they say your real prime is like 28 to 30 is actually because your physical prime usually kicks in at like 24. But what happens is when your physical prime kicks in, like in this scenario we're describing here, your strength is you have all your physical skills. You abuse the fuck out of them. You use every physical skill you have. You're faster than the guy. You're stronger than the guy. You can get around the guy. All these things, right? You abuse that and you see you're fantastic, but that's like your limit. What's funny is what your strength is also your limit. And what happens is over the next couple of years, you maintain most of your physical peak, but then even if it starts to drop a little bit, your like experience of losing, even though you had that strength, teaches you some other things, like for example, makes you work on your all-around game. And so let's say you are 30 at this point in the story, you might be actually less physically incredible as you were when you were 24, but it's like you've got the perfect sweet spot between like all that experience, all those losses that taught you, and you still got enough of the strength, you know, that you can still somehow win in the end.
Yeah, that's pretty much what Rain's 2015 career was like.
Wasn't there a part of you, though, like me, who, by the time 2015 came, you were like, you know, I can't keep loving you anymore. I have to let you go. Like, you're not ever going to win the GSL. Like, it was beautiful. Like, it was a great anime storyline, but this doesn't have a happy ending. You probably don't ever come back and win GSL. Like, you did fuck it up in 2012 and 2014 or whatever.
Yeah, he fucked it up for 3 years, man. He had multiple times he was good enough to win the GSL. Like, and then he goes to 2015. He's like, okay, you've lost the edge.
Yeah.
It's like I really can't believe in this. But then he did do it. So I was like, okay. Good on him. Basically, he took the MVP route. Just went with your head, not with your skill, I guess.
Okay, so since I described him, I thought like it's the chosen one, etc. And to a degree he was, because he represented the thing like that we didn't have at the time, which was like the god macro Protoss. But as we've kind of established through this discussion, he was all of that. But then he made the stupid decision of not doing all the things that all the other Protoss were doing as well. If he did on that as well, he would have been the... So here's the question.
He would have actually been the best.
Right? This guy isn't on your list. So my question, if Rain's on the list, right, is... Why doesn't someone like Zest get on the list then? Because the thing about Zest was, to me, this is the guy who did like that last part of the lesson. It's like, have all the skills and just apply them whenever you need to, you know? Who gives a fuck about beating this guy in the end? Beat him now if you can, you know?
Okay, why did I pick Zest? Well, actually, Zest was actually really close. I was thinking it was a choice between Zest and Rain, actually. Because they both had the fundamental, like, they both had the fundamental thinking, but Zest did it better. Than Rain, because he actually included all the cheesy shit. But the thing about Zest was he never actually proved he always had like a matchup problem. Like even during his like peak during 2014, his ZVT wasn't that yeah, he was good, but it wasn't like god tier compared to his like PvP and his PvZ.
Okay. Whereas at one point, I mean, you described in the beginning, Rain had like all the matchups, right?
Yeah, whereas Rain had all the matchups.
Even when no one had PvP in theory, you know, except like weird snipers and shit.
Yeah, and then even like LOTV, I think it's like he avoided like PvZ for like this first part of this year. So it's like basically, I felt like Rain was a bit more well rounded.
Okay.
In the thought, even though I think I did rank Zest higher. Because he had a much higher.
He won more titles at the right time.
More titles.
A bit dominant in that, right?
Yeah, he had a longer consistent peak too. So it was like, it was very hard. The thing is like, because of who I chose for my third choice is like, because Zest represents like a different kind of thought in strategic thinking, which is like it's like him and innovation will represent like the refinement process of like you take the established strategies and then you take them a step further.
Okay.
But I do give Zest this is that like if Rain revolutionized PvP first, like Zest took it a step further. Like Zest because Zest was the most dominant PvP player during 2014, and he did it in the age where the strongest Protoss players are playing all at the same time, and he beat all of them handedly. So it was like, yeah, I do have a lot of respect for Zest, but I ended up going with Rain because shifting the paradigm like how he did compared to like he was flipping the entire world, whereas Zest was just improving what Rain did. So it's like I'm gonna go with the Rain this time, I think, and because he's like a bridge between the three eras. Like there's MVP's era, then like the middle era, and then the end era of which was like 2011 to like 2015. And it's kind of like that.
So this is perfect setup because we're just talking about Zest now. We've done a Terran, we've done a Protoss. And if it wasn't for Zest, this next man might have a much happier storyline to his career. Who is the Zerg player you have chosen, stuchiu?
I have chosen the greatest Kong to have ever Konged among all the Kongs in SC2. It was Su. Yep. The player who was 4 championships short from becoming the greatest of all time. in my personal opinion.
Which here's the thing, that is the key context to set up here. What people won't realize is, because a lot of fans especially literally think you have to win to be the best, even though in theory, logically, if like you were like second, I mean obviously he did it like 3 times or whatever, if you were second like 7 times in a row and no one won more than 1 title, in a way you could still be the best, even though it seems counterintuitive, right? Because you never were actually the best on the day. So I get the logic, right? I know it's hard, but the weird thing is, this isn't just a guy who like, oh, he just never won. It's like, oh no, he never like sort of fulfilled the potential to be the best player ever, right?
Yeah, there's something special about Su's career. Is like fucking Su, Jesus, so many seconds. Basically, okay, where do I even begin with Su? Okay, so in comparison, MVP, like he did all the foundational work, and he did basically in MVP's case he did everything strategic wise. He actually did the refinement. He did innovation to like synthesize other people's work. He innovated multiple times. In Ray's case, he flipped the entire paradigm, and he did some refinement. In Su's case, it was all refinement and all synthesis. So he would take like before him. I don't know if he did this on purpose, or if it was just that natural evolution of what the standard metagame was, where it was like it was taking all the best parts of everybody's previous game, and he went a step further. Because for my money, I think Su was the second greatest among all players for pure mechanics. Like the best I think was actually innovation in 2013, but for Su he was like second greatest. And the thing was he was doing what? Okay, we're gonna have to go all the way back. Basically, I don't think of Nest-T as like a strategic mastermind. Because he was doing a style that fundamentally needed much higher mechanics than he was capable of.
Okay.
Because I think there was some really smart guy he did a post. Basically, he said the fundamental problem with Nest-T's ZVT was that he never had enough army supply, because he was making like 90 drones at a time. Yeah. And then he just runs during late mainly. But if the other guy was good enough, he'd just hold it. Whereas in Su's case, no, he had the mechanics to back up that kind of style, that kind of high economy style.
Okay. And
he had the tactics of somebody like Life for ZVT and ZVZ. So basically, he was taking this. I don't know if he was taking it, but he basically recreated this like really old style. But because he had the mechanical skill to pull it off, it actually made it strategically viable. Whereas it should have never been. It was never before for anybody else before then.
So here's the sick thing about this guy's career, right? If he just lost, okay, but maybe he just had the worst luck ever. Like, let's say, for example, okay, he'd had 1 week matchup and he'd just gotten that same race every time in the finals, or even worse, this might be even worse. Maybe that he just plays in the era of the best player ever and that guy beats him in every final. There's an obvious out. We can give him the pass, right? He successfully managed to lose to every race in the finals, and he never failed to get at least 2 games.
Yeah.
At least 2 games. So if you add those 2 factors together, it's not losing to the same person in all the finals, it's not losing the same race in all the finals, and he always wins games. That basically tells you, like, as good as all those people are who beat you, it's nothing even to do with them, right? It's something to do with you.
Yeah, like, okay, when we look at Su's career, I can kind of give him a pass on the very first one, Deer, right? Because there was like Deer was going crazy for those 2 months. Yeah. He won that one. They won WCS season finals right after that. It's like, okay, you won two of the most legitimate like tournaments that year.
Sure.
And this is Su's. Actually, it was both of their first finals, but I was like, okay, well, I kind of give you that one. But then you go into Zest, and like, yeah, Zest is one of the greatest Protosses of all time. But if you actually look at the games, Su had that one in the bag, and he threw it away. He just threw it away. And then at some point, he probably thinks to himself, I was that close. I'll win the next one. He goes against Classic. He gets, like, he looks good in the first 2 games, and then he just, like, completely loses it in all the rest of the games. It's like, oh, what is happening? There's something wrong with his mentality. I think it's the third one that finally breaks. No, it's not even the third one that breaks him. It's the one where he loses to Solar at DreamHack, where he realizes, I am fucked.
It's just finals, yeah.
Yeah, there's something wrong with my mind, because they played a week earlier, and like it was 3-0. It's like, but the 3-0 is actually flattering to how hard Su beat Solar. Like, if I had to give it a score, it would have been like 7-0. It's like, you beat him that hard. Okay. Like, and he goes to the final, he loses, and Sue must know there's something fucked up in his head because he's going there, he's thinking, Jesus Christ, like this guy isn't even on my same level.
Yeah.
Like there's like tears between them, and then he loses in the finals, and I think he tweeted something like, "I'd rather fail than get second again." It's like, oh my god, this guy's going to the GSL final. He's gonna fucking lose to Innovation in the GM. He loses to Innovation.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the question then. The obvious question about that sort of a pattern goes like this. If his mentality was in any way broken or fragile, like for example, if you win in some games, odds are you didn't come into every series thinking you would lose. You probably rebuilt yourself again to get there, and this time you really thought you were going to do it and you won some games. I'm sure there's a point in every series where it goes wrong. So the question is this. When it went wrong, was it that he still just kept playing his same style, but he fucked up the mechanics, he wasn't as confident at it? Or did the mentality break actually change his style in those finals at any point, or make him make weird decisions that he normally wouldn't? What's your take on which side you'd go on that?
Okay, there are like some nuances to like his weaknesses, Sue's weaknesses. One of them is that he was so strong in the mid game and the early late game that at the very end game, like he his weakness is the very, very end game. But and like Zest kind of did that, but the rest of them didn't. So that's not really
okay,
actual thing. It's like it felt like he was, because the thing is he wasn't playing what I considered the strongest ZVP styles at the time, but even then he was still winning, right? So it's like it's so hard to say. I fundamentally think his weakness was like he'd get into his own head, or like at some point he'd go up a few matches and then he'd be like, okay, that's it, I'm gonna win now, I'm just gonna check out, and he starts checking out.
Okay, so the problem is he actually allowed himself to hope, like I'm actually gonna do it this time. Yeah, and it's like, well, now you must be destroyed.
Yeah, hope's the killer. You can't never hope.
Okay,
you just do it one game at a time, and at the very end, it's like, oh shit, I won. But no, he at some point he's probably hoping, he's like, okay, I got two, I'll win two more, just two more, and then he just loses.
Should I tell you something funny? This is another area where I can relate it to Nanawa, right? I mean, he actually said this eventually in one of my interviews I did with him, but before that he had never fully expounded on it, right? Because unfortunately, when some people do interviews, someone says something fascinating that's like very, like leaves the door open and piques your interest, and then they're just like, next question, what do you think about the next tournament? You're like, what the... Come on, motherfucker, ask him the follow-up. So here's one of the things that Nanawa told me, right? That's a similar thing. Because obviously, by the way, you can probably count on one hand the people who this actually happens to. But Nanawa told me when he used to lose all those times in 2012, in all those foreign tournaments, and he used to lose to like every Zerg, he literally told me that if he was ever winning the game against them, suddenly, like, his brain would be telling his hands, like, keep moving, and then his hands would just start, like, spasming, and he felt like electricity was flowing through his body, and basically he was turning into, like, a shit Saiyan that couldn't do anything in the game, and just actually would be, like, just going slower and slower, and he would just, it's like on the screen, he could just see, like, his army just getting destroyed. It's like, move! And so, yeah, this is obviously extremely rare, right? This sort of problem can exist.
Yeah, extremely rare. There's, like, there's, like, Naniwa, Sue... Maybe Buell was like this. It's hard to say with Buell. It's like, yeah, there's some, like, it doesn't matter how skilled you are. You need that little bit of extra mental power.
Yeah.
In order to win, in order to cross the end of the finish line. Like you could beat everybody before then, but for some reason there's like something weird about the final stage. Like it gets to them.
Well, like it reminds me of a really great quote by another Kong, right? Which is about Stork in Brood War. Because here's the thing about Stork, right? It's that it was a mixture of the two factors in every final. Yes, he did play all-time great players, but then he also would play under par himself, so he wouldn't give himself a chance, basically. So the key thing is, I remember someone once just said about Stork, like the mistake people have with Stork is they think that he's actually just mentally weak and that, he's not a great player. What they didn't realize is, if you put him against anyone in a semi-final, this motherfucker will probably beat all these guys. He'll find a way to. None of his problems will be there. Right? They could still beat him if they were amazing players. The difference is in the final, that's when like all of his things go to shit. That's when all the problems manifest. And so then it's coupled with like the other guy being great and him having his own issues, and that particular kind of a logic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like, that actually reminds me of Sue's final like GSL run, where I actually did think it was like, because you have to realize he played Zest, I think, twice that year. Once was the GSL finals. The second one was in the GSL World Championship, where he played in the semifinals and lost 2-3. And then in his third one was like Su's DVP was really bad at that time, and Zest's DVP was really strong at that time. And you go into that finals, you go into that semifinals where they play each other like, okay, Zest got the record, he's got the strategy, and he's got the form. I don't think Su wins this, but Su does he took a bunch of strategies like from the foreign scene, like mainly he credits Cats, but he basically took all these cheesy strategies and like set them up perfectly in order to get past Zest. And you're thinking, okay, is this it? Is this finally it? Is he mentally strong enough to like win? And then no, he just loses again. It's like, what the fuck? What the fuck's going on with this guy? But I think he was strong enough to beat anybody outside of the finals, but.
Well, I mean, here's the sickest thing, isn't it? That when his GSL days of making the finals, by the way, 4 finals in a row, no one else even close. That's
no one will ever do that.
Here's the sickest part, okay? This is the ultimate iniquity. He makes those 4 finals. Even during the finals, he loses that DreamHack to Solar. When he's finally done, right, his runs are over. He's not even making, like, deep finishes now. Finally, he has this Kesper Cup or something, or what was it? What was that like small cup he had that he won, where he beat like Dark in the final? It was like here's the thing: it had really sick players in, but when he wins it, that's like life saying, "There you go, you get to win one now. That means nothing. Here's $8,000. I get the fuck up my face." So cheers, pal. That's pretty much my career done. I'm out, mate. Like that's the ultimate iniquity, right? The one time he finally wins, it's like $8,000.
It's like that's the. Of all the ones he could have won, that's like not the one he wanted to win. Oh shit! It was even worse because like Dark's actually a semi-Kong himself.
Yeah.
It's like, what is this? It's not...
Well, no, that's another factor as well that people don't know about Kongs. One is that much like. Here's the reason why, to me, Stork Fantasy and Jangbi, who all won titles in the end in the OSL, are all still Kongs, because they only fucking won them against each other. Someone has to win the game if you both get there. That's like cheating. That's like some sort of mad organised cheating. And then add in, another factor people don't know about Kongs, right, is everyone knows, okay, so Kong, the original term, comes from Yellow, right, the player who famously lost all the OSL and MSL finals he was in, right? But what people don't know about him is, it's not that he never used to win. It's not that he never won anything. He only won those shitty little tournaments where it was like, it's the same player who you play in that big final and you can win this one, but when you go to the actual one that you want to win, you don't ever get to win that. Like, so that's actually a key detail to truly crushing your soul entirely. Like, if you never won, you could learn to live with it. You know, like, I'm just a loser. I'm not good enough. You have to be allowed to win a little bit just so it can all be snatched away from you.
Yes, just so hope truly doesn't die. So you believe the next time you actually can do it and that you don't?
Yeah.
Oh, shit. That's the life of a Kong.
Okay, so you said that like very provocative statement at the beginning, like the best player of all time. If let's say, okay, so he was in the 4 GSL finals.
Yeah,
we're not going to go crazy here. I'm not like one thing I hate when you do like what ifs is where you give someone. I mean, the famous example you've probably heard it from like League of Legends now is like the TSM player Amazing, where he doesn't just want me to give him one game. He wants to have one game which leads to another game which would be a tiebreaker, which he wins, and then he wins a best of 5 and another best of 5, and then he gets to the final of the tournament. Like, that's like, you don't just want me to change one thing here. You literally want like the fucking sports almanac out of Back to the Future 2 and to change everything. Like, that doesn't work, okay? So let's say we're going to make tiny changes, stuchiu. All I'm going to do is I'm going to give Su, say, 2 of those finals. Let's say he can have the Zest one, it's very close, and I'll give him, say, the Innovation one, okay? Let's say I give him just 2. What does that change? What would that change in terms of, like, how people would think of him now?
How would that... I don't know.
Because that's not that much I'm asking for there, you know? Just a little bit, right?
Yeah, they probably consider him, like, the second greatest Zerg player for sure after Life. But then he won't probably want to be nearly as beloved, because I mean the thing about Kongs is, yeah, everybody says like only the victors are remembered, but in the case of the Kongs, everybody remembers them because they suffer so much.
Yeah.
So it's like you like they represent they're kind of like a myth. They're a fable of the man who like tries so hard and gets so far and then always dies. Like that's the reason that everybody even like remembers Su even in like SC2 where people don't really remember the great Korean players that much compared to like the other ones, like because he's remembered because he failed so hard and so many times. So he'd probably be less popular, but he'd probably be happier. That's okay. That's what happened.
Okay, I'm not even sure if that actually is a myth. I think that might just be a paraphrasing of the song "In the End" by Linkin Park. But
yeah,
okay, okay, right. So I made the joke before, which obviously can't work, which is that you said you'd picked one person for each of the races, but obviously there's 4 names. So the joke was like which Zelnaga player, but obviously you had to double up. So your 4th player for Mount Rushmore, who was the 4th player on this list? Which race did you double up on?
Terran, obviously.
Oh, what a surprise that is! It's almost like that is a broken
Terran.
race in all StarCraft games.
It is a broken race for a majority of the StarCraft games, yes.
So why did you pick MMA then?
Okay, yeah, so I chose MMA because, okay, so here's what happened. I had one player for each period I really liked and represented a different style of strategy and had a mix of greatness in them. So MVP was the beginning, Rain was the middle, Sue was the end. And then I wanted a player that represented all of represented like the entire history of StarCraft. In that case, there were only 3 players that were played in the beginning and then went all the way to the end. There was MMA, MC, and Pult. Actually, I could have chosen live too, but for different reasons.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, they all had similar careers. All 3 of them started in Korea, and then all 3 of them left Korea. The difference between MMA and the other 2 is like MMA eventually gets back to Korea and gets to the semifinals of a GSL, and he got to the BlizzCon. So, and then he goes to the military, and he swears he's coming back. Like, the thing about MMA's career is like it's the most representative of the entire. Like, if you're gonna take one person to like represent the entire like SC2 scene, I think MMA is a good choice because he's there in the beginning of the career. He's like dominant, and he falls down, and he goes to the Western scene to playing there, and like he's really good. He's playing against against MC, and he eventually does like rise out of like his hellhole, which like Slayers threw him in, and he goes all the way, and he gets to the BlizzCon finals, and then he goes back to Korea, and he gets one last run in GSL to prove that he still really had it. Like he's like despite all those years, despite years after his prime, he could still make it, and then he goes, and I think his final tournament he actually did win was a Home Story Cup. So there's like it's kind of like a homage to all of the StarCraft2 history's MMA because he's been everywhere. He's done a bit of everything.
Okay, so when MMA first appeared, okay, and obviously because the original storyline, for people who don't remember, right, that's why you really do have to set the scene, because the problem is when someone then wins something, people rewrite history as to like, well, obviously I know who that guy is. Well, yeah, you know now, don't you? But the point is, the actual original storyline of Slayers was actually quite sad. I remember when Slayers was announced, right, and it was like, Boxer has his own team, and I was like, cool, who's on it? No one I've ever fucking heard of. Like, these are all like Korean players, but none of them are good now. And the whole point is, MMA was one of the first names to come forwards because he was the team ace. He was the guy who's in the team leagues was doing well. So then eventually he makes the final of that super tournament and he loses to Pult there, gets smashed in the final, and then he goes and he has those tournaments where he has like seconds some MLGs, and then he wins an MLG, but one that was like it was like Losira and MC he was playing. And so at this point in time, you're thinking, right, he's clearly a very good player, but you're wondering actually, is this guy going to become some sort of a Kong? Is he going to be someone where if he plays like like an MVP Pult type character, is he just going to lose to them? Like, how did he then become this guy who can beat basically the best player of all time in his prime in a fucking GSL final at BlizzCon? MVP.
Yeah, MVP to MVP. That's the thing. Is like he understand. Like I actually don't know how much Ryuan changed his fundamental strategic thinking. I don't think it was that much, or maybe at some point he took on those lessons himself. But MMA is actually an incredibly thoughtful player. It doesn't seem like it if you watch his like early Wings of Liberties games because he's multitasking everywhere. He's attacking left, he's attacking right, he's attacking bottom, or he does all the drops. Like there's only among all the Terran players, there's like only him and Gumiho who do that style. But the difference between Gumiho and MMA is Gumiho, his strategic thinking was, if I attack 9 places, they can't defend all 9. Whereas MMA's strategic thinking was, if I attack X, that opens up Y, and then I'll attack in Y, and I'll open up Z, and then Z I go through. Okay. He was very methodical. He's very specific about what he was doing with his multitasking. And then he took that and he added it to his thinking about the game, his thinking about his series, and that's why he beats MVP in that finals, and why he's like fun, why he, like among all the like great players during MVP's prime, he's the only one who has like a winning record against MVP, is because he thought to that high level, and he had like the mechanics to back it. Whereas, like, okay, yeah, he didn't have the mechanics compared to like all the top great players, but he wasn't as bad as like say Polt, who could not beat MVP because like Polt was a bit too far off, whereas MMA was like in between the two of them.
So I was actually working for Team Acer during the era when they picked up MMA, and in this era. Okay, here's the thing. He'd had a few, he'd had his dip in form, he'd had his problems. Obviously, like, Slayers was fucking with him a bit. But then when we got him, the hope was, right, the main thing we got to do is just get this guy to Western tournaments. Maybe, like, it's like MC at that point in time has already set the stage.
Yeah.
You just go to Western tournaments, you try and clean up. All you have to do is be better for 3 days. It's not like the monumental task of getting to the top again in Korea, where you basically have to almost conclusively be the best player for, like, 2 months or something. So we thought this is going to work out. And it goes without saying, the first few months were fucking rough. They were really bad, actually. I remember just thinking, like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't have vouched for this guy because, by the way, he was getting like a mad salary as well. Like, we had to pay like mad money for him. So I remember thinking, like, fuck, what have we done? And so here's the mad thing. He didn't actually kick in to being super, super good until around the time that the team also picked up innovation, right? And to pick up innovation initially, because they were paying MMA so much, the plan initially was maybe we just have to drop MMA. And so instead what they did is they went to him and they basically said, like we either have to drop you because we have a chance to basically get like maybe the best player in the world, or we have to like, in terms of budget, we'll just have to put your salary down. And so from what I remember, they just put his salary down. It was still like an okay amount, it wasn't but it wasn't like some egregious Hawk level shit. And so they put it down to something lower. And believe it or not, that's literally almost exactly when something kicked in and he just started to do well again in like, WCS and all this sort of thing. And he had this return to his career. Why do you think he had a return to his career? What changed about him in the game, at least? What was he then successful at? What was his slump and what was his revival, do you think?
Okay, so here's the thing about Gumiho and MMA. They both had slumps. I compare the two of them a lot because they had a similar style, even though there's like some distinctions. But here's what happens: is like the speed vac or the turbo vac comes in HOTS, and what this essentially does is it teaches every other player, every other race, how to deal with it. Like Zerg learns how to deal with it, Protoss learns how to deal with it, Terrans learn how to deal with it. And not only does everybody learn how to deal with it, they get all the tools in order to make it easier to deal with, all the Terrans basically can take their style without learning the intricacies of their style, because like in the slow medevac era, like you had to really think about the sacrifices you were making when you're doing that kind of drop style. Post that era, you didn't have to think that much because there's always a way out. So basically, instead of it being like a very like strategic kind of style, is much more mechanical based, and MMA didn't have the mechanics to back that kind of thing up, because he compared to the gods of that time, he was certainly lacking something in the mechanical department, and if you can't back that up, like that was his like major style. So he had to rebuild himself, and then it's interesting because I don't think he rebuilt himself into like anything like unique strategically. What happened was he was taking a bunch of like standard styles, adding like little bits of twist into them, and instead of like railroading people like what innovation did, like he was just making smarter, better decisions, like more similar to TaeJa than innovation, I guess.
Okay. And
that's kind of like, but the thing is, like, that kind of style takes a long time to build. Like there's a reason why, even though TaeJa and innovation are in all of HOTS, there's 3 great Terran players: TaeJa, Innovation, Maru. Among those 3, I'd say like 99% of all the Terran professional players got their inspiration from like Innovation, because Innovation's style was way easier to understand, way easier to execute. Like you understood why he was doing what he was doing, and why he was doing it better than you, but you would copy it anyway because that was the best way to play. Yeah. Whereas Maru's style was fundamentally based off of his like mechanics.
MMA, you mean, right?
Yeah.
Did you mean MMA or Maru there? Because you said Maru.
No, I said Maru. Yeah, Maru.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah, sorry. I think those are the 3 greats in the HOTS era.
So what did Maru do?
Maru was like a mechanical god, and he was like doing all this crazy shit like nobody else is doing. It was like he was free balling everybody, and like nobody understood how or why he was doing it. Like he was doing the Marine Mind push before Marine Minds were even buffed against Protoss again. So it was like he was doing a bunch of mechanical shit that nobody else could pull off, and like he was doing a bunch of like wild strategies like nobody else was sure what to do against. Whereas TaeJa's style was fundamentally based off of like he was smarter than everybody. So what would happen was he'd take, like, TaeJa and Life are like interesting players in the sense that if you set them against anybody that's below them, it's a terrible shit game. Like they just stomp them. Like it's like there's so many other things that I'd rather do than watch a TaeJa Life game against an inferior opponent. But if you put either of them against like a great opponent, it's a game worth watching because a great opponent will always push them to their limit, and then you actually see why they're so great. Like that's why all like the great TaeJa games all go to late game. TaeJa versus Rain, TaeJa versus Innovation, TaeJa versus Sue, TaeJa versus Innovation, like TaeJa versus a lot of different people, and Life versus a lot of different like players, or like Life versus TaeJa themselves. Because what was fundamental about them was like TaeJa's idea was like he would never commit to an attack. He would never commit to attack because you know how you said like the correct way to play, or not you said, but Artosis said the correct way to play is the macro game, sure. And then the macro game, you want to prove that you're way better than the other guy. Yep. That's actually what TaeJa did, but like for TaeJa, it was like really easy. Like he understood like what next step was every single time in every single situation.
Sure.
So that's why he actually had a decent amount of comebacks himself, even though he didn't seem like the type to be mentally strong. I don't think he ever really was.
I mean, in terms of like, you mean like he wasn't like a super clutch mentality of like, you know, I'll always win every final, but it's more like he's the guy where it's like, okay, we can go late game because I think I'll make the next 5 decisions correctly. Will you? Yeah. It's like daring you almost, you know?
Yeah, so he'd always make the extra decisions. Like that's why he actually beat Zest so many times, and because Zest, like a bunch of these top Koreans, like when they were playing during like TaeJa's prime, like when they moved over, like every once in a while they play in like a foreign tournament, and then TaeJa would inevitably come out. Almost always he came out on top. Yep. And the thing was like they didn't understand like TaeJa's fundamental strength was his end game decision making, and then now we're going to go back all the way to MMA, and that's what MMA was doing, is building his fundamental decision making, like, and that style is like so hard to think. It's so because the thing about StarCraft2 is like a lot of people call it a superiority game. It probably is, but in order to play at the high speed you need to make all the decisions before the game starts. Like you need to understand how you're going to react to whatever situation you are, like instinctively, like
yeah. Like people aren't actually making some of these, like, unless it's like you have a minute to make up a plan. In the moment, you're not actually thinking consciously. Almost, you've trained yourself to just know, right? This is the correct decision, and just do it. Be decisive, right?
Yeah, and that's the fundamental difference between like what MMA TaeJa was doing compared to all the rest of the Terrans, and it's actually similar to like what MVP did, where you're not actually like you have to actively think during the game of what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. Like that's like what it's like. MMA's like MMA, even though MMA was like more standard, he slid more towards the TaeJa scale than he did to the innovation scale, which is why I think he had more success than a bunch of other Terrans during that time period. Like the only other Terran that like you might say had similar success was like Bomber, but like Bomber's like entire style was so weird. It's like he basically be throwing his experience at you. Like he just take a random build from his entire career. Like it could be from 2010, it could be from 2015, whatever, and just throw it at you, and then you'd be wondering like where the hell does this come from? It's like, is there a DeLorean here? And then that's how he'd win. Whereas MMA was be thinking more along the lines of, I'll make one better decision here, and then I'll get me this, and then that'll give me an extra like 10 supply. The 10 supply, I'll crush the third, and when I crush the third, I'll wrap this game up, something like that.
Okay, so here's the thing: even if MMA had tragically, I mean, I won't say died. Let's just say gone into a coma at the end of 2014, he'd already be a legend, right? He'd done so much in the Western scene and the Korean scene, but there is that chapter that you referenced before, right, where he goes back to Korea, and if you remember, the whole thing about the Western scene, and by the way, I bought into this as well, because it seemed legit, was like, okay, Polt, okay, MMA, okay, MC, enjoy those WCS championships. They're not anything like GSL championships. They're sort of fake, mate. You basically just went to sort of like the kiddie table, and you stole everyone's lunch. Like, you're not the best players, guys, so enjoy the championship, but it's not real. And when you go back to Korea, you're going to get your body slapped. But you know what? MMA went back, and as you said, he made the semis of the GSL.
Yeah, I think he slapped TY in that GSL run. That was a good run.
How was he able to do that, though? How was he able to go right back into like the Lion's Den and go that deep?
I actually don't know. There's something weird about it. Like, I've always wondered, like, even when you rewatch those like series, like he's just making better decisions. Like that's it. He's just making better decisions than these guys. And I've always wondered if like the Kespa training system like made people dumber. Like,
Okay.
Not all right. I've always had this theory, right? Like,
Yeah.
I've always, for whatever reason, all the Kespa coaches make the Zergs players smarter, make the Protoss players smarter, but make the Terrans dumber. Like all the Terrans, for some reason, like they're making bad decisions.
Do you want a theory? Shall I spitball a theory for you here? Remember, I'm not somebody who's an expert on StarCraft 2, so if this is totally wrong, tell me right out, we'll throw it out the window. But one of the things from watching the career of MVP that I noticed was, when I said there, like, Terran's most broken race, bullshit, not really. Like, when you consider how many years there were in StarCraft 2, really, I'm just taking that bias from Brood War, right? But one of the reasons why I do think that, in a way, Terran was broken is that here's the problem. If you were just someone who played, like, the same style every day, and you're very one-dimensional, actually, Terran, you can only win almost the innovation style, where the meta suits you, the matchup suits you, all these things suit you, right? The difference is, if you were the player who his main skill was decision making, this is where Terran looks broken, because you have the most tools. You have all these different builds and all these different units and all this thing. Like, I remember the best example I ever saw of this, right, was in the heart of the bullshit Infesta era. And it was, do you remember it was the one where at Gamescom, where Nurture finished second to MVP. And the way MVP wins this tournament is everyone tries the Broodlord Infesta versus him. And he perfectly times out the tech so that as you're trying to adapt to the tech of what he's doing, he's onto the next tech item, he's onto the next one, onto Valkyries, and he like times it out so that if you didn't do this perfectly, you just lose the game outright. Like, they do fucking wreck you. But if somehow you knew the decision making of what he's going to do and then when you should do it, you could use all these tools to overcome even the most ridiculous imbalance. And so it felt like those players who had, like, they were Terran players, but they had the really insane decision making. That's what felt unfair. Because the difference is, like, think of some of the other races. If you're a Protoss and you get to the mid game and you realize, I have gone down the wrong tech tree here, but that's the end of the game for you. Like, it's over at that point. You're probably not going to win this game. Purely amateur, purely spitballing. What do you think of this theory?
I mean, there's definitely some truth in it. I think because when I call all these Kespa Terrans dumb, it's because they all have bad decision making. Like, I fundamentally think like almost all of them like just copied innovation. I
mean, they follow a flowchart, right? They get taught by the coach. You do this after this after this, so they're not going to like do something drastically different when maybe it was called for in that scenario.
Yeah, whereas like you go like MVP, MMA, TaeJa, like they had their own like decision making. They were doing on the fly like constantly, and like the thing is like Protoss did eventually get over it, I guess, like because of what Zest did and what like Rain did, like a bunch of these guys ended up finding ways to like avoid that, like the tech trap, which is like, oh, you got went the wrong tech, instant death. That happened a lot in the early days, whereas those guys found a way to like avoid that problem altogether. So they make. But the thing is like, okay, you know that like there's a short story called like The Bound Man, where some guy's tied up, right? Right. And then because he's tied up, he's able to do all. He eventually learned how to deal with his limitations. Is able to do all this like crazy like acrobatic shit. Okay. But then eventually that gets cut. Eventually, like somebody cuts open the rope. That's I'm gonna
hold and guess he's worse when he gets loose. Right?
Yeah, like before when he was bound, he was able to like choke out a wolf. Okay. But then somebody cuts open the rope. He's like, "Oh fuck it!" And just pulls out a gun, and shoots the wolf because he completely forgot how to do all the other shit. He did. And then that's basically what's happening with all these Protoss players is they're stuck with this limitation, and then all of them have been like running into their heads into this limitation. Eventually, like they all figure it out, and they're like, okay, here's what you do with this tech in order to deal with like all these X situations. But the thing is, like, because they have to think that way, all of them became smarter.
Okay.
Whereas all these Terran players are like, here's what innovation does. Just copy him, and then just kept winning. And then like when it stopped winning, like they stopped thinking. Like there was this period in like 2013 where like everybody was just doing these SCV pools. And none of it was working. It was like a 10% win rate or something really stupid, but they just kept doing it because they had no idea what else they were supposed to do. And then
okay, I've got a narrative to throw at you that I want to get your take on. Again, by the way, if you disagree or see something differently, don't worry about it. Just go straight into that. But okay, if you look at the names on your list, so we've got MVP by most consensus, the best player of all time. We've got Rain. I mean, we've kind of outlined in this video why, okay, maybe for most people he's not the greatest, but like you look at his skill set and at time his potential, and he could have been he could have been the best Protoss player or one of the best players. You know, he had this potential at some point in time. Then you look at Su. This is another person could have been the best. Certainly could have been the best Zerg or was the best Zerg. And again, the limitations on these guys are just themselves, okay? They really did have like all the skills. The difference with MMA, and this is how I actually framed the story of MMA's career when I did my article about him in, I think, 2014, so I wouldn't have covered like the end of his career. I literally titled the article like StarCraft 2's persistent overachiever. Because when I look at his skills, right, his actual like raw mechanics, his basic skills, the fact that he plays Terran, but so do a billion other people, you know. Yeah. The fact that, you know, he has all these slumps in his career and he always has to work his way out of them. And again, it's not like he's like inventing something new every time. Sometimes he's just playing like other people. But it's like, to me, I look at all his championships and I'm like, not like, oh, you missed this one. Oh, what happened to you here? You should have been there. I'm like, how the fuck did you do this, dude? Like, this is insane to me that you could even do this, you know.
Yeah, actually, beyond his like 2011 career, which I actually legitimately think is like one of the greats, or it could have been one of the greats. The rest of it is like, wow, you're doing way better than you probably should. Like, put it this way, he's the opposite of what I think Parting should have been.
Okay.
Parting was another one of the chosen ones. Like, he had incredible mechanics. He actually had a pretty good mind. He had a pretty good mind for the game. But when it came down to like the clutch moments, like he can like most of the time he was never able to really do it. He's never able to get past round of 8. It's like he lost a bunch of finals. It's like whereas like MMA's case is like, yeah, you don't actually have the mechanics, you don't have the skill set. Like I wasn't like his decision like I point out like his decision making is like his key like to winning, but it wasn't like awe-inspiring. It's like, I'm just gonna make a good decision here.
Okay.
And that's it. It's like but I guess if you make enough good decisions over time, you're gonna outpace the guy who's like super godly at all the other aspects. It really makes me think like StarCraft 2 is more about decision making overall. Like, okay, put it this way, like I actually think Flash was much better mechanically than MMA, but if like you put their
in StarCraft 2 we mean
in StarCraft 2
yes.
Like
okay.
I like in Flash was like a genius in Brood War. Like I don't even think there's like anybody comparable to him in any other game, really. Maybe Savior. That's a different discussion. But like when it came to StarCraft 2, like I felt like he was never really thinking. I felt like he actually should have been Protoss.
Okay.
Yeah, I felt like he should have been Protoss because of all his strengths. But like even when he was just playing Terran, like his mechanics were way better than MMA. And even though he was playing in a much harder region in a much harder tournaments, I felt like he was always a bit underwhelming, like for somebody who had like that level of skill.
Yeah.
Like he should have got like a few more, whereas like in MMA's case, like he probably should have gotten a few less if I didn't know about like his like mentality of like never give up. I'd actually assume he would have got way less than he should have.
I mean, that's an interesting way to define Flash in StarCraft 2, because I mean, to kind of like to pick that up and run with it. One of the problems I always saw with him, I understand why people used to always hype him in those GSLs when he did well in the group rights, because he'd look super sick, and when he was looking super sick, you were like, he's cracked it, he solved the equation, he's going all the way this time, boys. But it's like he's a player where I always felt like his mentality was that there was a flow chart. He thought, right, I've learned StarCraft 2, fine, I get what I'm doing now. And so say someone beat him, he was like, oh, okay, my bad, that's what I'm supposed to do in that situation. It's like, that's not really the lesson though, dude. It's not that was the specific thing you had to do. It's that sometimes there are different decisions that a guy can make there, and he won't always just do that again next. Like he probably won't, in fact. And so you're in a way you're almost sort of lagging behind every time. It's like you have to be the guy who can make those decisions or read that decision in a way.
Yeah,
I mean, if you were Protoss, like, I mean, I guess that's the solution for you, is because then you could just pick a time to go all in or something. Like, that's a pretty good solution. Like, rather than have to make decisions, just make one decision. It's pretty good, right?
Yeah, it's a good way to do it, right? And then even when he's like forcing those late games, he's going to be forced into situations that are going to trade him for like thinking. Yeah. Because he's got like I said, all the Protosses all did really great in the Kesper system because they all became great decision makers. And then in a way, like you look at his Brood War career, you look at this career, it's like, I actually think like a lot of his strengths align more to Protoss than they did to Terran.
That's why the sickest thing ever is that the one who had the most success was J-Dong, who just stuck with Zerg. And then if Bisu and Flash just go back and fucking swap races, might actually be pretty cool, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would have much preferred that. Well, I would actually prefer them to just keep playing Brood War, but if they play StarCraft2...
I mean, let's not trigger everyone who's watching the show now. I also agree with that, Stuchiu. I think that basically, let's just not do StarCraft2, or let's do it... Actually, I'll tell you, here's the... Okay, this is my fair version, okay? Because here's the key thing that I actually do appreciate about StarCraft2, is that people like MVP... I mean, Reign to a degree never would have been as great in Brood War. So I actually just wish both games had run in parallel, you know, and that the old gods had stayed in there and been amazing. And then StarCraft 2 is a different game with different skills, and other people had success in that. I think that actually would have been a cool way to sort of develop all the talent, you know.
Yeah, that's actually what I prefer too. Like, because there are like really transcendent talents that came from StarCraft 2, like Reign, Soulkey. I think Soulkey might have been. He was pretty
good. He was pretty good at the end of Brood War, yeah. Innovation was not bad at the end of Brood War as well. They were the two that were like, they were on their way maybe one day to being super good. But yeah, all the rest, like, I mean, for example, I mean, actually, Sue was not bad at the end of Brood War, but a lot of them who were the really greats in, like, it goes up saying, someone like Nesty would never have had a fucking career, basically. That was done already, you know. Done, yeah. MC, here's another one where it was kind of a bit done for him, you know, especially bearing in mind his whole persona was, like, arrogance and sort of, like, bravado. That doesn't work if you're getting red banged in every time. Like, you can't do that at that point in time, right? So, no, I agree with you. I think you can there clearly were some gods in StarCraft. I mean, we talk about TaeJa and all these others, but... it's different domains, right? It's different areas. I
don't actually even think of them like as the same game, as like a similar, like they're a similar genre, but it's like what you need to succeed in one is so completely different from what you need to succeed in the other. Like it's hard for me to it's hard for me to think of them as like as a sequel to each other. You know, it's like,
I mean, the problem comes when people are constantly trying to compare the two. Like performance in the two and why one. Because again, I mean, it's like saying that one sport has running and catching, therefore now start playing NFL. Like, whoa, no. Like, what, you know, like that. Sure, some skills are the same. In fact, the biggest mistake they ever made was calling it StarCraft 2, calling this race Terran, this one Zerg, and this one Protoss, because that makes you automatically think it's going to be similar. Whereas really, if it was called something else and they just had different names, half of us probably wouldn't have fucked our own brains up trying to use our old models and apply them constantly, right?
Yeah. Like, the only person I know of who actually, like, transitioned well was, like, MVP. It's like and when I mean transition well, I just mean, like, he was taking, like, Brood War builds and he was, like, adapting them, and he was adapting them well. Okay. Nobody else could do that. It's like, that's kind of weird, right?
Okay, right. So that's pretty much the end of this episode. So I have one last question for you, which is this, okay? In terms of your overall Mount Rushmore, so you've got MVP, you've got Reign, you've got Sue, you've got MMA, right? Even though, like, for someone like me, for example, I'm not someone who thinks that Sue has to have the titles to really be up there on the all-time great list. You know, you did so much in every other area of excellence. Yeah, he was really up there. But for a lot of people, you know, this isn't the four greatest players in StarCraft 2 history. So what do you think? How would you define, like, what was the overall philosophy behind how you chose this? Just like to cap it off, like reiterate again, what was like the logic behind how you chose the four names, and what's like the theme that holds them all together?
Okay, so the logic behind the four names was the thing about Mount Rushmore is, like, it's supposed to be a representation of, like, specific times in history, like the early period of the United States, and, like, they each represent a different like aspect of the nation, right? Okay. Like, I could have done that in StarCraft 2, but it would have been like meaning it's like, okay, who were the first four early, like, greats? Like, oh, that's easy. MVP, Nesty, MC, MMA, or Dongregu, whichever one you wanted, right? And then it's like, okay, well, what I could have also done the other ways, like, who are the four greatest? But I already did that list, and it hasn't changed. Like, MVP, Life, TaeJa, MC. But what I want to do is, like, okay, I want to put it in, like, the similar, like, to Mount Rushmore. Is like, it represents, like, the history of the game, and I wanted all the great. And not only did I want, like, the four players to be chosen to be, like, have some greatness to them, I also wanted them to represent, like, some specific period and some specific, like, strategic thought or way to approach the game that nobody else quite did. So, like, in MVP's case, he did, like, everything basically. In Reign's case, he, like, he shifted the paradigm. In Sue's case, he was, like, he did all the refinement stuff, and, like, he synthesized all the builds before him, and then he went further with that, and he represents, like, the Kong aspect. And then in MMA's case, he's kind of like a normal dude, just a normal dude who did way better than he should have. It's like, even though he's, like, among the greats, right? Like, he didn't do anything crazy, but he did way better than most people probably should have expected from him. And he played in the Korean scene. He went to the foreign scene, came back. He's going to the military now, and he said he's going to come back and play StarCraft 2 if it's still alive by the time he comes back again. So it's like I chose him because he represents all of the history. So
Okay, right, that's it. Thanks.
All right, thanks.